Hi everyone, my name is Zen Maiman and I'm the game designer and producer on SHASN AZADI. Joining me today is Dr. Reed Francis IV, the CEO of Red Planet BNC. Lee's first comic, Six Killer, released in 2018 with a follow-up in 2019 called Ghost River, and they were received astoundingly worldwide. He has contributed to many RPGs, including Devil Runs and the recently smash success Avatar: The Last Airbender. He's also advocates for community literacy and entrepreneurship in the Native American youth. Lee has been kind enough to come on board SHASN AZADI as the writer for the American Revolution Campaign. And I just wanted to have a quick chat with him, introduce him to all of you, and understand his perspectives and what he's bringing on board to this retelling of the histories that we have inherited. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my goodness, thanks for having me. This is fantastic. I'm very excited. I'm excited about the game. So this is such an honor to be a part of this.
Thank you so much. So let's start talking about your journey as a content creator. What got you into media, and why is it that you do what you do?
Oh my goodness. So I started, my background is in education. So I started in education working with Native youth. My family is from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico, right in the southwest of the United States, obviously. And when I began teaching, working with Native youth, what I found was the fact that a lot of the things that they had on the shelves wasn't a lot of the things that I would read growing up, right? So like I read comics, I read sci-fi and fantasy. I was a huge Dungeons and Dragons nerd. I was a huge, Dragonlance kid, and these things were and comic books and everything. They were very influential to my growing up, and especially as an urban native, because when globally and worldwide, you would look at me and be like, really, that guy's native? Because I don't see the long hair and he's not wearing a headdress or feathers. And I was like, well, listen, I got stuff I can change into, where I've got my, I got my bling and I got my ribbon shirt, and I, used to dance powwow and all the rest of that. But that's not necessarily what I do day to day. And I think that was really what started to speak to me moving into my media journey, was that's not the day-to-day experience of many Native folks. We don't get up and look like, these great, we just saw like this big splash at the Emmys and this big splash at the Met Gala, with a Native woman that was just absolutely rocking it. Well, man, if you go on her Facebook page, I've seen other pages of her, dude, she wears a hoodie, she's playing with her dog, like that's what you do when you go out. So a lot of these representations that we have of Native people in popular cultural media are not our own. And so what I did was I charted out a course, and especially from seeing what was happening with my students, I said, well, we need to publish more stuff, right? And I worked as a writer, and I've been, writing since I was a kid. And, I thought that we needed to be able to, needed to be able to create more positive contemporary media, including comic book superheroes or illustrations of stories that we've never heard of before. I was 2014, so I've been doing that for almost close to a decade now, right? We're over the hump on that. So that was what started me in this piece. And then knowing how nerd paths lead to other nerd paths, right? Like I was like, well, now I'm doing comics. And then somebody's like, oh, we want some Native writers in RPGs. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start writing over here. And so I started writing for, writing connections for people. And I wrote for video games, have written for video games, and producing my own comics and producing other people's comics, and really being supportive of that within the Native American and Indigenous community. So I started that publishing in 2014. I founded the Indigenous Comic-Con in 2016, and I opened Red Planet Books and Comics in 2017, the only Native comic shop in the world. And on we roll. And so now it's games and comics and toys and collectibles, and some of it's Native focused, a lot of it is Native focused, but some of it's not. And I think that's the whole point too, is that Indiginerds, as we like to call ourselves, have a lot of, we still, it doesn't have to be all Native all the time. There's, we can talk about Spider-Man or Aquaman. I don't know why I brought up Aquaman, Batman, or any of these other characters and figures that we like and that we have grown up with that are important to us. Well, we want to celebrate and recognize that as well, because that's the whole point of being an Indigener. It's not just culturally specific. It's that there is a moment where we want stories for ourselves, And we want also to recognize and absorb the stories that we've grown up with and enjoy. Because, I love Marvel movies. I love everything in between. I love RPGs. I love Cthulhu, etc.
Mhm.
So that's what we get to play. And that's why I jumped into this media.
That's so much, so many things that you do, so many amazing, cool things that you do. And what you're saying resonates with me so deeply. As someone from India, I feel very often that the global cultural dialogue has been less of a dialogue and more of a monologue, because we have been consuming and importing culture and not necessarily getting our fair share when it comes to time to speak and tell our stories. And what you are doing with all the initiatives that and the media pieces you're creating is basically doing exactly that, and that really resonates with me. So like,
And I think when we talk about it, part of the work that I got into was also to push back against pop culture media, right? And
mhm,
especially American media. American media became so dominant we can say through colonization, but also just through the fact that there were the resources to create cool movies. There were the resources to create all these cool things, and it spread the worldwide, right? And so
mhm,
it's there, but a lot of it still perpetuates stereotypes and misrepresentations, both for propagandistic reasons and for just because it looks cool, right? So natives riding horses with feathered headdresses, that looks cool. That looks cool to a different world, any more than, like I'll put it, for you, it's the snake charmer, right?
mhm,
Sitting out there and being, because that's what we get in America from the cultural zeitgeist, right? Like this
mhm,
is how it is. And so it creates these general washes. I talked a lot with my friends in Australia, indigenous friends in Australia. It's just like, for them, it's all boomerangs and kangaroos, right? Like
mhm,
that's what has spread into this, into the world. It's crocodile Dundee. That's not a knife. This is a knife. Here's my snake, right? Like this whole thing,
mhm.
because that's what hits the pop culture zeitgeist because of American media, cinema, comics, television, all the rest, right?
Yeah.
So creating creating this kind of media, either game media or pop culture media, comic books, toys, that is actually a direct pushback against these kinds of these long-standing forms of echoes of colonial colonialism, right?
Mhm.
So when we didn't get the chance to own our stories or
Mhm.
tell our stories because we were too busy fighting for our lives.
Yeah, and how and resources build resources, and because of the ill-gotten gains of the past, our ancestors were deprived of resources, which basically funnels down to us, and us not having a space in the zeitgeist. And I'm so happy you're doing what you're doing. If so, that brings me to another question. If you were to change something about the way pop culture is created and consumed worldwide, what would it be and why?
It's a good question. I would like to I would like the world to understand that there's so much space for stories. It's not a zero sum game. We're playing cooperatively, not competitively. It's not this idea, and it very much is a colonial white supremacist hegemonic, right? It's if you want in, then obviously I'm going to lose something. And
Mhm.
trying to break through that because I think let me go back a second. I think there's people that are absolutely trying to control this and controlling these narratives. But I think the massive population is just consuming these narratives. And so
Mhm.
therefore, when you're in a white supremacist, colonial hegemonic system, you just consume a lot of this stuff. And then you build on that. But then you start to get mad because if I say, hey, I'd like my story told the way that it actually represents me as a Pueblo boy growing up. I didn't ride horses. I'm a nerd from the suburbs. Like, what does that mean to not have my story told, right? So a
Mhm.
lot of times when I talk about it, I say there's room enough for everybody's stories. You can tell your story as a white kid from the burbs. You can tell your story as you're allowed those stories. You
Mhm.
don't have to conform to this hegemonic. You don't have to conform to this Uber narrative. And that is what I would love to be able to, if I was to change anything, it's to get people to understand that there is space. Stories don't take up room. right? Just because I publish a comic, I publish a game, doesn't mean your game or your comic go away. And a lot of the times people were freaking out. They're just like, when Marvel was just like the change, and it was like, oh, Captain America's Falcon and he's black. We're so, sad. And it was like, guys, have you been a part of comics recently? Like, they're going to retcon all this in, I don't know, 20 minutes anyway. So like, it doesn't even matter what's going to happen. It was like, this happens now. And that's cool for right now. That's cool that, gets to wear the stars and stripes. We get to hear a different narrative. In the meantime, go read something else. I stopped reading X-Men and Marvel for a long time after Onslaught. I was like, well, I didn't. Now I've come back to it. They're telling good stories. There's room. And I went over to I read other stories, right? So I think that's the part that I would say is like, there's so much room for other stories and everybody's stories in this place. If I could get through, that's what I would get through to folks if I could change anything.
Yeah. And talking about changing things, as a storyteller, as a mentor, as a publisher, as someone who really makes stories possible, when you're picking the stories you want to tell, do you have a heuristic model? Do you have a set of rules, or do you have a way of just parsing through what stories excite you and what don't?
A little bit of both. I mean, I'll say that it's the stories that excite me, but also I try to tell. So for me as a particular, I'll put it into two frames. So me as an artist, I'm always looking for the stories that aren't told, or highlighting and championing kind of new concepts that aren't, played around with. So in my comic Six Killer, that was my response to the Violence Against Women Act and how missing murdered Indigenous women in the United States are not recognized, right? Period. Still, we keep talking about it, and like we get a day, and we all wear and the VA, and I was like, and women are still dying. So I decided I was going to create a revenge story. And it's a young woman seeking revenge for the murder of her sister. I was like, you know what? The only way I can get this poison out of my system is to write about it. So I'm going to write a young Native woman who's just going to go start shooting, And I mean, it's very much an American tradition, so it works out very well. But, like Kill Bill style, she doesn't even have to shoot. She can just get she'll get a samurai sword, and she'll, a traditional Cherokee, and she'll just be hacking through folks. So that's what's coming, right? But that was my way of responding to that. So those are the kinds of stories that appeal to me. The stories that are not told. Now, as a publisher, it's those untold stories that the world doesn't know about. Maybe it's somewhere online if you happen to be reading it. But I think there's a medium where we can get it out to young kids. Like, I want to see a shelf of comics, and I want to see a shelf of books where you can pull the next one. You can be like, oh, I've never heard this story about Tarzan Brown, Narragansett Native American who won the Boston Marathon twice, competed in the 36 Olympics in Germany, where there were only 3 men of color that competed during that time, including Jesse Owens. There was also Tarzan Brown was in that as well. So we talk a lot about Jesse Owens because he was amazing, and track and field is always, like the sprinting events have always been the thing, right? Who's the world's fastest man, right? Jesse Owens was amazing. Well, there was also this other guy, right? And there was guys before him. There was Jim Thorpe, who had his medal strip, but everybody knows the Jim Thorpe story, at least here. But there are other Native folks that have done incredible things throughout time. And that's the stories that I like to tell, right? I like to find those stories, those little niches. The greatest marksman in the history of the Army is a Native guy, right? Like, in terms of confirmed kills, not unconfirmed, but confirmed kills in World War I, is a Native man, right? Lawrence Pegamagabo. So those are the stories that I look forward to tell. And then I also just want to tell nerd stories. I was like, hey, we're going to tell a story about, a world of tricksters and a world of monsters and a world where all the Native things exist, because I think that's really exciting. So that's what I look for, and those are the stories I try to tell.
Awesome. So on that note, would you have any hidden gem recommendations of things that are not necessarily mainstream that a lot of people might not know about for our audience to go out and consume? There could be anything: films, television, comics, games.
Well, we'll start from the biggest stuff that's right there. I would check out 3 television shows. Obviously, Reservation Dogs on FX is getting a sense of what it's like to be Native in Oklahoma and truly Native in a modern era. It's a great show. It's really funny. There's a lot of inside jokes. Probably not all the audience is going to get it, but it gives you a good understanding of what it looks like currently. A great sitcom is Rutherford Falls, written, and show run by Native women, which is pretty awesome. Ed Helms is in that from The Office. Like he's in there. It's it's a really funny show. And then there's a great show, and I'm totally gonna miss it because I can't think of it. It's on Sci-Fi right now. Resident Alien. That's what it is. Resident Alien takes place. There's native cast in there. Deals with a lot of complexities around native identity, adoption, things that are going on with that. It's aliens. It's Alan Tudyk, who's amazing, right? Like so. Any Firefly fans, and he plays an alien and trying to live in Earth. It's a fantastic show. Sci-fi does what sci-fi does best, right? In terms of games, obviously things that are coming up, big Avatar. Oh, definitely. That's not a hidden gem. That is like that's the mother load right there, right? But it's going to be fantastic, and really the way that they've been working it around RPGs, involving my friends to talk about how do we represent indigenous communities correctly. On the flip of that, you had a really also successful as Coyote and Crow. So if you're an RPG fan, check it out. They're going through all the motions right now in terms of getting everything ready for release. But it's, it looks very similar. It's like, okay, what would happen if colonization didn't take place? And so it's sort of indigenous futurisms. So I'd highly recommend that. And then anything you want to check out from Red Planet Books and Comics, my shop. We got lots of great things there. You can check out Six Killer. You can check out, which is Kill Bill meets Alice in Wonderland set in Cherokee country. You want a harder read, check out Ghost River, which talks about the 1763 massacre of the Conestoga people outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. These are my recommendations.
Awesome. And we'll be dropping all these and with links in the comments in the description below. So please check them out. Is there anything else you would like to tell? We have over 1,000 backers already. All of them are going to receive and consume this campaign you're going to write with us. Is there anything you would like to tell them?
Yeah, the framework of the game, the course of all history is changed and often has been changed by indigenous peoples. So it's not just the Americas, it's globally, it's worldwide. The people that were there are the ones that are usually the ones that spur these movements, are the ones that give the colonizer their access point. If you think about the American Revolution, they learned the strategies and tactics for fighting from the people that had been fighting for 20 years. We fought from the trees. We fought guerrilla war. We didn't stand there and just get shot, gunned down. That was the way that British tactics worked. And so this idea of this new type of warfare, that's indigenous. These new ways of thinking, these new ways of being are often indigenous. And so wanting people to understand that those contributions are critical and important to the history of anything, the entire globe, right? It's not just built around British, the United Kingdom and America saving the world. It is built around individual heroes and individual people, many of them indigenous, Black and brown in this world. So that's what I want to say. Thank
you so much for that. And like you and the other authors coming on board and helping us build this is enriching this entire game experience in ways that we could have never imagined. So thank you so much for coming on board, and thank you so much for sharing everything. And yeah, that's about it. Everything that Lee's recommended, and including the things he's worked on himself, will be in the links in the description below. So please check them out. SHASN AZADI is on Kickstarter right now, and it's going to be on Kickstarter till the 8th of October, midnight EST. So drop by, check it out, and see it's a retelling of revolutions from around the world, and we would love for you to check it out. Thank you so much, Lee. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing everything.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and have a great day, everybody.
Awesome.